Trauma. A deeply or disturbing experience. Trey's with me now. She's got her own page in relation to trauma. It's not just a gloom and doom page. It's got many other different kinds of things on, but it's all part of Trey's journey through trauma and out the other side. We aren't talking about healing, but we're talking about living with trauma and living a better life with trauma. But we also touched on earlier about Trey's problem with her hearing early on. She still has got hearing problems, and she's partially deaf in one ear.
Yeah, my left side is mostly deaf, and my right side I've got about 80%.
Yeah, and mixed with that, plus the other thing we talked about, which was the dyslexia, which, if anybody's listening now and experienced dyslexia, there's many problems attached to that can be quite traumatic, not least of which is feeling excluded from mainstream education, whether it be through exams or in the class or whatever. So today we're going to talk about trauma. We touched on that dark place that people get to for whatever experience they've gone through, and how they actually start to move away from that dark place to a slightly better place in order to cope with life. Trey had been watching the SES, Celebrity SES programme, and there was something in that programme that triggered off this particular podcast. We were going to revisit the podcast, but this is kind of open things up a wee bit more. And we're going to look at trauma in the scale of how people gauge it, whether it be severe, medium, low or whatever. It's still trauma nevertheless. So we're actually going to centre on that trigger that Trey had from Celebrity SES, and we're going to move on from there. So pass you across to Trey.
Yes, I was watching it. It's back on TV again of late. I've got a new series, and I was watching it, and he was saying about people pushing themselves beyond the norms, and he tends to tap into any emotional issues they've got, and of course they're fighting their minds to be able to do the tasks. And it kind of I've reflected on that a wee bit, because that's basically how I've lived my life now, especially physically now, but when I was younger mentally, I've done that as well. So it was interesting that by pushing yourself in some ways, it helps you mentally. It reminded me of that benefit, and it brought that up for me. I find that programme quite interesting. I see how people are reacting to things, and it does make me reflect on my own reactions.
So not everybody's going to go on Celebrity SES. Not everybody's going to try to take on those kinds of grueling tests that do push you beyond the norm. None of those contestants are actually going to be in the SES, as far as I'm aware. And it's only probably a smidgen of what the SES proper have to contend with. But it does actually allow people to introspect and look at their capabilities, doesn't it?
It does.
So if you were to, I mean, obviously physically you're starting to get stronger, you're doing more in the way of physicality stuff. I mentioned a friend of mine who has taken up photography.
Yes.
Because of what I would say was a deeply disturbing and distressing experience in relation to her hearing. Yeah? So physically, obviously, photography, apart from actually picking the camera up and go for a walk or whatever, isn't as demanding as the SES, or probably as demanding as what you do. But if we're looking to move away from a dark place and we're looking at ways to probably challenge ourselves, challenge our abilities, what would you recommend?
Well, I mean, anything at all that can be mentally stimulating. And when I was younger, I lost my hearing when I was a toddler, and I didn't get any kind of decent hearing back till I was about 12, so I was behind at school. And when I left school, I hadn't done very well. I hadn't really caught up. So trying to go for jobs that I wanted to do, I didn't have the qualifications. So I started to do more focused studying at college, day release, night classes, and then eventually I did a degree with the Open University. I studied from when I was 17 right through till I was in my mid-40s. Barely a year off, I studied. And that was a mental focus and pushing myself beyond my limits. That was how I did that when I was younger.
You'd mentioned, or I mentioned, about the dyslexia, something you weren't really aware of until later.
Not until the last few years.
Later in your life. So in tandem with that, although it was unknown at the time for you, you mentioned about word blindness, you mentioned about a number of things like that is quite common in dyslexia. So the hearing problems and the problems in education were ongoing. How did you override that? How did you find the ability, the will, the desire to push on through that and push on from the trauma? Do you know?
I'm not sure. I'm not really sure how I got through my school years. I do know I had this will to do better. Now, fair enough, I had a bit of pressure from family to saying about my grades. They weren't very happy, and I obviously wanted to try and do better. And when I left school, I realised it hadn't worked for me. And I was disappointed because I wanted to become a veterinary nurse, and I didn't get the grades. I needed to go to college, and I was very disappointed about that. That really did, it really upset me. I felt awful about it. So I decided to go into computers at that time, and it was early days then. And I realised that I needed more qualifications to get a job in finance and IT and admin. And I actually couldn't get a job because I didn't have the qualifications, and I was again upset. I started working at a factory, and I decided I'm going to get out of here, I'm going to get the job I want, and I went to college, and that's what drove me. It's the will to want to do better, to get what I wanted. Now, I don't know where that came from, but it was that will, that's where it came from. I couldn't get the job I wanted the first time. I couldn't get into computers and admin because I didn't have high enough grades from school. I'm going to go to college and I'm going to get what I need. And that's what I did, and that's where it started.
So we can't assume that everybody has the same willpower, because then we start to grade people again and say, oh, well, you know, I did that, but you didn't do that. So if you say, for instance, someone that maybe hasn't got the same drive as you, but they're in a similar situation, and we talked about the mental challenges, we talked about the physical challenges, what would you recommend to them to do?
I think I would try something that would be something maybe of more of interest, that would challenge you so that you feel confident when you're learning about it, and then you get those achievements. Because I picked a course that was to do with business, and when I was getting through it, it was those little achievements that kept me going. And when I passed the first exam, it was awesome. That's the only way I could say it was. And it became, right, I can do this. I'm going to do something else. I'm going to go for that next. It was that confidence. It was because I got through an exam. When I was at school, I was failing. But I went to college and I passed an exam. You know, I spent those months studying and I passed, and I did okay because I became more focused on what I was learning. It was something I was more interested in. And I think that helped for me. And I think possibly that would help for other people. Something they're enthusiastic about, that are actually really interested in, start there.
Does it need to be something that's accredited?
No. It just happened it was for me because that's what I wanted. But no, it doesn't. No, as long as it's something you're interested in and you can get into it and improve your skills in that, and you can feel good about that, you know, there's a start.
What if the person's in a dark place and they're in the house and they can't get out? We touched on this in the previous podcast.
Yeah, I think one of the things I learned to do in my own space, and I know it's something really simple, was learn to knit. Because I wanted to learn how to make clothes, my own clothes. It was something I'd never been taught how to do, but other people could do it. I'd seen family members. always I looked and thought, oh, that's great. Wish I could do that. And I didn't have the opportunity to learn, and I admired people that could do that. So I got basic skills on knitting, and I had to go, and the first thing I knit was like way too big and it was hopeless, but I kept on going, and now I make my own clothes. That was in my own space. You know, it wasn't something I had to go out to. I didn't go to a course. I got a book on it.
So would you, I mean, obviously we would assume that this person, this hypothetical person, finds a little bit of strength to actually look away from the dark place and what they're actually experiencing. Now, we're not going to promote daytime TV because you probably end up with more trauma. Knock the TV off, because people can get drawn into that. They'll just watch mundane programmes all day, and most of them are mundane, including Phil and Holly. So just look for something that they're interested in. Is that a message you'd send out?
Yes, because the other thing I did was I taught myself how to compile and develop database systems. I did that in my own space as well. Programming, I did that as well. I set up account systems before I even went to college. I did that as well because it was something I got exposed to. I think it's just looking into things that you might be interested in and really throwing yourself into it, but you've got to have something you're interested in. It could be arts and crafts, it could be painting, it could be DIY in some ways, doing things with your hands, making things, learn a computer, learn a language.
What about the use of libraries?
Yeah, that's where I started.
We discussed a wee while ago my gripe about how libraries are basically being cut back to the bone, and the opening times didn't really cater for people, especially elderly people. A lot of the smaller libraries were closed, you know, libraries that were within communities where elderly people could actually make their way there. There's a lot of people who live on their own who, you know, found a great deal of solace just going in and sitting with a book or just being among people. Now it's more advanced, there's a lot of computer systems and things like that.
There is.
Would you recommend that people in a dark place get out of that dark place, get the coat on and pop along to the library, if there's a library in the area, that is? Would you recommend that?
Yes, and then have a look in on the books of sort of like the non-fictional stuff, of things that you might be interested in, because they've got all kinds of books and that. I used to sit with books before computers came along, the internet as such, and get books out with instructions on things to learn. I had and eventually I bought my own book of different ways of knitting, stitching, cable. That's how I learned how to do a cable stitch. I love cable now. Once I'd done that, I'd learned that I actually stretched what I was doing. It's all those little learning things, isn't it?
So that first step, and I mean library obviously is something because I used to do a lot of the annexed work in libraries with people, and I think it's a tremendous environment just to soak up what's going on.
Yeah.
And then there might be that one stimuli where you think, ooh, what's that book there? Travel.
Yeah.
You know? And if you have got dyslexia and you can't read very well, you can still look at the pictures in there.
Yeah.
And then by doing that, it takes you away from what you're thinking. Not all the time, obviously, but it'll certainly help. But it might also stimulate an interest in something.
Yes. I think such as first time I was exposed to making paper flowers was in a book from the library. I remember loaning the book and sitting with coloured paper and following the instructions in the book.
I'll tell you my story about paper roses.
But I mean,
that's another one for the podcast, folks. That's an old group band days. I won't tell the story now, it'll come again later. So you would recommend that someone thinks about potential interest, thinks about something they really had a chance to do before, and then just pursue that in some way.
Well, yeah.
What about getting people to give you a hand?
Well, if you have somebody you can go to the library with, somebody who maybe shares the same interests as you and doing something together, that would be good because you kind of encourage each other.
Do you think it should be something as well that because it's very hard to access groups when you're in a dark place,
Yeah.
you know, because you don't really want to be around people and you don't really want to, you know, be seen to be down or flat or whatever, because a lot of people get embarrassed by things like that. Would you recommend that people find something that they can do within their own environment, with their hands or whatever? Would you recommend that?
Yeah, I think it kind of reminds me of when I was younger. When I was younger, I remember people making their own things. Can you remember when everybody used to make things in matchsticks?
Oh yeah, I mean it's kind of going back. A lot of the cottage industries now.
Yeah.
It's kind of. I mean, I noticed with wallpaper, it's starting to reproduce the old William Morris printed wallpaper.
Yeah, and the people used to make things, models and
pottery.
They used to pottery. I mean, I did pottery years ago. I was crap at it, but I had to go.
Glassware.
Yeah, and there was there's a thing that happens now. They call it upscaling. Where you get old furniture and things, you do. Now that's come back round, and so yeah, there's plenty of things I suppose you could get into, and there's books and all kinds of things like that. And now with the internet, you can get all kinds of pictures and see videos of people doing it. Awesome, isn't it? I mean, it's.
I think so. Yeah. So I would strongly recommend that, folks.
Yeah.
However dark things may well be at the moment, if you can maybe just listen to these tips that we're given now. It's not a complete panacea for all the problems that you may well have, but it's a start. It's that first step, isn't it?
Oh, I've tried all kinds of things. I mean,
apart counselling.
Yeah, apart from me studying, I did cross stitch. I did pottery. I tried painting, knitting. I did try to make my own clothes because I could use a sewing machine because I learned how to make shoes. So I did all that, and then I got into card making models with card, paper crafting, Zentangle.
Well, I mean, mine wildflowers.
Yeah.
And trees. I remember looking at the medicinal benefits of particular herbs and things, and you know, I learned so much from that. I used to go for walks in the wood with a little pocket book, and I found that even though things were still dark, I was actually doing something, and something was triggering off that little bit of light there, you know, with me. I mean, I used to do little walks through all parts of certain woods, and I'd find particular wildflowers, and I'd you know, take pictures of them. I remember taking pictures of them, and just that a little bit of stimulation, a little bit of mental kind of focus can help massively. It certainly helped me from, you know, from that dark place at that time.
Houseplants, I used to have lots of
fruit flies.
Not those, but I used to love having house, and I still do. I mean, in the future I'll have more. I always had plenty of houseplants, and I got quite good at looking after those.
Birds.
Yeah.
Some people, I know people criticise people who are bird watchers, or they call them twitchers now as well. People who are also vilified trade spotters, you know, but maybe a lot of those people, they haven't just got an interest in that, they actually are trying to do something that takes them away from, you know, whatever they're dealing with. So yeah, I would definitely promote that.
Yeah.
Going back to the SES, which is what we started off with, what do you think are the components in that programme where the SES are dealing with individuals who've quite clearly got some baggage?
Yeah.
What are the components in there that enable people to either push on through or give in? What are the components in there? When I say giving, I'm not criticising people who end up going off the programme, because there may well be perfectly good people and maybe quite able, just at that time they didn't actually achieve. But the ones that stay in, the ones that continue to push on, what do you think are the components that the SES introduce in there that enables them to do that? What do you think that's... Because it does connect with this dark place.
Yeah, it does. I think the mental side, I think because of the pushing them physically, very physically, they're having to use the mental control to override the fact it's so hard. And also the control aggression was interesting. I found that interesting, the fact that they use aggression in a controlled way, but also using aggression to get them through a difficult exercise. So yeah, that's interesting as well. It's not just the physical side; it's the mental and the emotions and how you use them, and how you use your mind. So they're the components I find get the people through.
So how can we, talking collectively here, how can we introduce that into people's everyday lives, whereby those self-same components are in there, and without all the extreme physicalities, mentally or whatever, that can enable people to get to a place where they're able to introspect, look at themselves, their abilities, the strengths, the weaknesses, and then start to work on those?
I think that people can use the same mental strength or reflection and such like for anything that they do when it's difficult, because everything is difficult when you're in a dark place. You don't have to be trying to run around with heavy bottles of water and doing extreme exercise. Just getting out of bed and going to the bathroom and getting dressed and washing dressed is a major event when you're in a dark place. So it's using those same techniques as such, just to do everyday things until those everyday things aren't as difficult.
So then if we go back to the library, not actually go back to the library obviously, if we go back to what we talked about where someone's in their own home, then looking for particular interests, things that they actually are interested in whilst they're in that dark place, then perhaps leaving the house, coat on, umbrella if it's raining obviously, make their way down to the local library, actually be able to sit in the library, to maybe talk to the librarian, ask them some questions about things that they'd like to see, sit with a book in the library, look at the pictures if they can't read too well, maybe take a book out if you join the library, that'd be another thing as well. And you take the book back about the interest you're probably not really into, you think, oh, that might be alright, you take it back to your little chair with your cup of tea and you sit with the book. Would you say, and we are talking in contrast to the SES, that what they were doing in there and what this hypothetical individual did just by leaving the house or looking at interests or getting a book or whatever is something that would actually improve their mental health strength-wise?
Yes, because if you're feeling anxiety and depression and stress, just getting out of the house and going into that environment on your own and sitting on your own and maybe even speaking to somebody just for a short time is an achievement.
It's a massive achievement. It's one which is often overlooked, and you can look at someone climbing a mountain or whatever, and that's good. But if someone's in a really, really dark place and they make the effort to do something and to get out of the house and go to the library or whatever, that's equally as good. Yeah. And I think people have to realise that, because you get some, I only went to the library, that's not massive. It's massive from where you were in that dark place. So if we look at the SES, where they push people to a particular point where they're about to break, and then there's something inside them clicks and they find that's something, you can compare that to someone's in a very dark place, because if they can do that, find that will to get out of that chair and get out of that door and go to that library, that's equally as massive.
And sit in that space on your own, it's not easy, because part of you just wants to run back to your place where you think you're safe. It's staying there.
Yeah, and that's exactly the same level. The SES push you to that point, because you've got two choices. You either push on with this or you give in and walk away.
Yeah.
And it's just the same for someone that's getting up to put the coat on, they're in a dark place, or they actually get to the library and think, oh, can I really do this? Can I get in? That's massive.
Yeah.
They're both massive because they've got to a point where they have a choice.
Yeah.
I can either move on and get stronger, or I can stay in that dark place. Because both places are dark.
Yes.
On
Yeah.
the SES, where someone's really up against the wall, or they're in that cold water and they don't really want to stop in there, you stand at the library door and you're scared to go in,
Mm-hmm.
they're both equally the same.
And it's the same thing as well. The other weight challenge for people as well in the dark place is saying going for a cuppa on their own
Absolutely.
in a cafe. You go, you're going to go in. There's going to be people around you. You're going to have to ask for that cuppa. You have to sit on your own and have that cup of tea and be comfortable to be able to do that.
Absolutely, and you know, that brings in the isolation aspect, the loneliness, because, you know, like say in the SES there, when you're in a very dark place physically and mentally, you're lonely, you feel isolated. The same if someone's outside the library door, they're sitting in an armchair at home in a dark place, they're isolated, they're lonely. Now, if you look at that deeply, some people choose to be isolated. I do sometimes,
Yeah.
and that's not a bad thing, but nobody really chooses to be lonely. And if you go into a cafe for a cuppa on your own and you've never done it before and you're in a dark place, you feel lonely.
Yeah.
But you see other people having a good time and you feel isolated.
Yeah.
But you didn't choose to be isolated.
No, and I've been there. I mean, I would not go into a cafe on my own for years. I wouldn't do it. I just couldn't bear it. I was so uncomfortable. I can do it now, but I still don't like it. I must be honest, I don't like to go and sit in a cafe on my own and have a cuppa and have, you know, I actually try and find somewhere where I'm not too close to anybody, because I don't like the idea of maybe anybody looking at us and I'm on my toe or catching somebody's eye, and yeah, I still find that difficult.
And yeah, I love it.
But I can go in the library because there's a book to focus on.
Yeah.
It's easier, I find, the library. I used to often go in the library on my own and look through books I wanted to loan, because I'm a bit of a reader, or I like to read. Bookworm.
And you, I mean, obviously it'd be a different podcast about isolation and loneliness, but you don't have to be on your own to feel lonely. There's many people in relationships or with friends, allegedly friends, but they can still feel lonely, they can still feel isolated. So it's a much bigger issue, this, than just about the dark place and the trauma, etc. It's about being human.
Yeah.
And you know, this particular podcast itself opens up many other areas that need to be looked at. And you've mentioned one about going to the cafe. If you walk past a cafe at any time of the day, you'll always spot somebody who doesn't necessarily want to be on their own, but they have little other choice than to be on their own.
Yeah.
You know, and it might just be that person who's got themselves out of that house, out of their armchair, been to the library, and now they've gone in the cafe. That's the next step for them.
Yeah.
I've done the library, now I'm going to try and go in a cafe now and sit on my own.
Yeah.
And you know, there's a lot more loneliness now in the world than there was before. There's a lot more people who stupidly think that by having the internet and they're on their own and might be in a dark place, I don't know, and then they start to use that as a medium to replace that feeling of loneliness and isolation, and actually all they ever do is create more and more. That's the sad thing.
Yeah.
Because these people, and I know we've laughed with you about imaginary friends. I know people can face talk, and you know, people can you know, communicate online, but you're still on your own in that building.
Yeah, I mean, I've one of the hardest things I ever did was actually sit and have a sandwich outside, and it was actually in Greg's, and I ate that sandwich so quickly because I was so uncomfortable. Because I was sitting on my own, I hated it. It was so uncomfortable to be in that space and things going on around me.
Did you know as well, though, that it's stigmatic? People actually, and again, this is for another podcast.
Yeah.
People often stigmatise people who are sitting on their own in a community setting. They actually stigmatise, even look at them in that way. Oh, there's nobody else sitting with them. You know, there's not. Well, she's been sitting there for half an hour now. Nobody's been. You know, people do actually stigmatise. I mean, when you're sitting and you feel uncomfortable, it's probably because society makes you feel uncomfortable as well. Everybody else is sitting together.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, 30-year-old. Had a little child in the playground that's in the corner on their own. You know, Johnny No Mates.
Yeah. Pretty much most of my schooling that was.
But we won't mention Trey's imaginary friends online. So I think we'll round off with this now. I hope that if you listen to this, that you've got some kind of pointers and maybe you can connect with it in some way.
Yeah.
We will revisit it. The items we mentioned earlier about loneliness and isolation, they are also factored in being in a dark place as well.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it was touched on in Fox's book about when he walked through the woods with his counsellor, and she was talking about everything that was around there and the birds tweeting, and he could see nothing.
Yeah.
Just this darkness.
Yeah, because that's where you are. It is. There's so many times that if I'm travelling on my own, waiting for buses, yeah, it's everything really.
I think though, when we do revisit the podcast in relation to isolation and loneliness, I am going to bring in that people really have to work just as hard to be comfortable in their own space.
Yeah.
And I think if people can aspire to achieve that, then other things that happen to them won't be as bad.
Yeah.
Because quite often, especially such as divorce, when people end up on their own, you know, they probably lived their life through the partner, and then suddenly they've cut all the friends off because they're really into this particular person, and suddenly they're on their own. You know, they maybe spent time with the family from early on, right the way through, got married, had 2 kids, all the rest of it. So people really need to work hard to get comfortable in their own space.
Yeah,
go to a cafe on your own, go to the library on your own and sit like Johnny No Mates with a book.
Yeah.
You know, but it might be someone says hello to you and you don't realise that actually they are lonely.
Yeah.
But just that one hello, good morning is kind of brighten up their day, you know, but you're comfortable in that space.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to learn that throughout my life, where I did get comfortable. I can go out in the mountains and spend a week on my own with just a few birds and mice and whatever else. Not the same tent, obviously. And listen to the wind blow through the trees.
And getting washed in rivers.
And getting washed in rivers, yeah, that's certainly enlightening. A bit like the SES. So yeah, I think when we do that one, I think we'll look at that in more depth, because it does pertain to what we've started to talk about.
Yeah, and it is part of that isolation of how trauma affects you, because you cut in so much, and you're in a dark place, and you're isolated, you're alone, and so forth. It's all connected, isn't it? Yeah,
and I mean, I came in with the definition of trauma. And do you remember what the definition was?
It's too far back. That was like how long ago?
A distressing and deeply disturbing experience.
Yeah.
And from that, whether it be loss of hearing or you mentioned there before about the hearing, or any event which has caused that, with that comes the feeling of being lonely and isolated. And even if you're living with someone and they don't really understand or they don't want to understand, you can feel just as lonely and isolated. So I think on that note, we'll put the light on now. We've moved out of the dark place. And thank you for listening. Any comments, as we said before on the SS2 blog, please contact Trey or myself.
Yes.
And if you want to have any advice given, although we're not actually counsellors as such, we're more than happy to discuss it with you.
Yeah, definitely.
Is that your parting shot, Trey?
It is.
That's a wrap. Thank you, folks.